This artwork is called the Study of Rupture. It's part of a series that I developed back in 2013. The context initially was I got invited to be part of a collective exhibition at Beirut Exhibition Center back in the days. And it was called The Journey Through Our Heritage. And we were a bunch of contemporary Lebanese artists. We were invited to create artworks as a response to modern artists or painters in Lebanon. So instead of picking a modern painter and doing something in relation to it, I thought, okay, like what is stuck there? What is it that I'm really feeling in a very urgent way and that I want to talk about? And it was very much about that gap that we had intellectually, culturally, from a knowledge point of view, or even from an art language, especially back in the days. We didn't have in the Middle East or in the Arab countries or even in Lebanon a lot of dense, contextualized like collections or research or critical writings about modern painters. So I decided to talk more about that gap. And I decided to talk about this non-dialogue and how we cannot just force it on young artists. And the closest imagery or visual that I had to visualize that or to represent it is to actually portray myself as a young woman, a young painter, and a young artist. And the sensation or the feeling that I was aiming to represent is the one that is very much in a sense of introspect, like looking inwards. And what does it mean for us as young Lebanese artists to look inward, to look into that gap of generation? What could have happened if the gap was not there? What is missing? Why are we very much individualist also in our approach as human beings, but also as our approach as contemporary artists? Are we thinking collectively? Are we pushed to look back, or are we genuinely looking back? Are we educated to look back? You know, like I was very much focused on this type of questionings. So that was in relationship to the show, because at the end of the day, I was commissioned to create an artwork, so it had to be positioned in dialogue with what the show was about. But beyond that, of course, there was a painterly desire and a personal research and quest as a painter and as a fresco artist. I feel there's always a point, maybe not for all artists, but maybe for painters, a sense of urgency to go back to the bodily, to go back to the figuration, you know, to go back to a sense of self, something that you want to understand about how you look, how, not even the portrait, but the self-portrait. And I think maybe I was aware of it, but didn't overthink it back then. Like something in me wanted to have this type of pit stop, you know, to delve more into a genre or a painterly language that where I can learn from, you know, because maybe it's important to talk about my relationship to how I got into painting. When I studied fine art, the intention was to become a painter, and only a painter, beyond anything else. So when I left school, I felt like I was not fulfilled and not satisfied with how I was taught personally. And that desire to paint and to keep learning and to acquire skills, let's say, was still there. And of course I did not the deviation, but I was interested in monumental scale, in murals, in surfaces. I was aware of it. I directly started to take workshops with industrial painters to learn about murals, to learn how to actually treat a wall, prepare a wall. So my personal training, I chose murals and the site-specific painting to teach myself, to keep my hands busy with materials and painting materials. But the desire to sketch, to portray, to be in a sense of very dedicated like study of a theme was still there somewhere. And I didn't make it over hard on myself, like to re-go into academia, to re-study. No, I was very confident that you can build that slowly and you can have agency in how you create your own painting language. So this came through first industrial painting, then I got more even into decorative painters. I collaborated with decorative painters and architects, and I took workshops, and I did my own bespoke murals. And I had a level of satisfaction from learning like what happens when you paint an ornament very slowly, even if that particular ornament doesn't represent my visual language, but that slowness and that sense of representation and what it holds, you know, historically was very appealing to me. And in the meantime, parallel to that, my contemporary art practice was evolving, and fresco became also an important medium, because not only it represented mural, historical techniques, or just a sense of a scale. Of course, I'm interested in those dimensions, but the chemistry of it and how we can treat it in a contemporary language became very much appealing, and we can talk about it more in depth. So just to bridge you back to the desire of a painting to choose a figurative topic, that happened in 2013, where I had already did my first large-scale fresco at Beirut Art Center 1 year before, and it was very abstract, very site-specific, very much related to the stamina of an artist, you know, in 10 days, you know, what do you do with the surface when you have 10 days, etc. So after that, I wanted to pause with something very classical in the way it is, you know, like portraits, self-portraits are recurrent themes in art history. And I wanted to spend more time with that. So the aim in the end was to create a large self-portrait that stands leaning on a wall in Beirut Exhibition Center. And the eyes are closed because of that desire to look inwards and to show that there's kind of like a thin, you know, like layer between the intimate self or the interiority of our thoughts, our bodies, our contemporary bodies, and the world outside, whether it's the dialogue outside in that art center or around us, or even the city, or even globally, you know, like people to people. And it was amusing to me to also learn about myself in a representational way, and in a way I never went back to painting myself, but in fresco technique. So it wasn't like I iterated on paper and then iterated on canvas. It was a very clear intention since the beginning that any personal representation of myself will have to be cannot be but in fresco medium, and we can elaborate on that. So Study of Rupture is part of a series that intended to be like a studies of different fresco, and until I feel like I've exhausted it, I've trained into painting myself, I've looked more into how can I close my eyes while looking frontally, you know, like what could it be if I tilt my face? Like, what are those micro messages or micro meanings emanating from it? And then it led to my larger piece of work that looked, was very convenient to the show. But then in time, and maybe with different acquisitions, different context of, I started digging out all those studies, and every once in a while, you know, like I realized that each one of them had a different, you know, they are iterative, but they have different small tiny variations that, you know, give them further meaning individually. So this piece sits as part of this, let's say, larger context. Now, going back to the idea of the relationship of self-portrait to fresco, I look at fresco a lot as I said, it's a historical technique for sure. And to me, it traces back to the very beginning of painting because of the nature of applying natural and colored pigments on wet and on a mix of fresh lime and sand. So we have a lot of organic, alive materials that are very much dictated by weather conditions, by bacteria, by chemical reaction, CO2 in the air, humidity. And these chemical processes look very much like things that I was facing as a child, you know, like living in a very humid home, the weakness of the way things are built in Lebanon. My family house personally was wounded in one of our 80s war, and it got deteriorated. It was not ruined, it was deteriorated. So I was raised in a house where it is a very strong house, it's a pillar. I had a phenomenal childhood, but I was witnessing to deteriorating surfaces in an almost on a daily basis for years. So witnessing all these processes and their relationship to time, how time manifests on surface, how your body also is affected by this. I was personally very allergic to humidity. We cannot breathe water. So all these things, you know, made me more interested in the fresco medium, because I never looked at it only as a technique that is stuck in the Renaissance, for example. And I refuse to say that it's strictly an Italian technique. Yes, they mastered it, they taught it, they were able to break it down to, let's say, a formula. But if we look back historically at where fresco exists, they're not strictly European. They take a lot from the space around them, from what is possible. So the more and more I looked conceptually into the potential of fresco and what it represents, what type of effect it communicates, how can I link it to my personal intentions, like connotations I'm interested in, what do I want to inform my viewer through it. I felt like fresco became more and more personalized. I felt like that technique would allow me to speak of so many things that I'm interested in, especially about time, especially about the body, especially about the surface, about violence also, about the wet, and how we're all affected by those environmental, like emotional environmental things, emotional landscapes, etc. So in a way I feel like fresco presents itself as a technique always like something that is always in a state of becoming, you know, because yes, you start by the age of building it. You have to prepare the surface, whether it's wall or wood. You have to mix your mortar, work very fast, layer, and then up to 3 layers or maybe 12 layers if you want. So that's like you're bringing the surface to life. And the surface is an integral part of the work. It's not like any other painting medium where you bring your visual on top of something that is disassociated. In fresco language, the visual is not independent. It's an integral, like the pigments, the painting itself and the surface are one thing, you know, like the painting is embedded in that stony body, let's say. So you build this and you have that type of new age of, okay, the surface is alive, but then with time, and history has proven itself, time takes agency, environment, weather, many other factors, and on top of it we have the wars, they take, you know, agency into making this fresco something else, because it will keep evolving depending on those factors. So I always said that fresco has a double age, you know, and that age of ruin or residues or age of what can stay, you know, what is that most resistant, resilient part of it that will defy time, and what will be lost throughout the process is a conversation. And then going back to study of rupture, or to my very clear intention that my representation of my face or myself as a woman, now even more as an artist, as a mother, as a human being, you know, I feel like those dimensions are very much interrelated. So it makes sense that I am an integral part of an ecosystem, you know, of the ecosystem of fresco, but the ecosystem of around us, you know, whether it's womanhood, motherhood, a community of artists, a political self, someone that wants to take place in a larger system or ecosystem, let's say. It just makes very much sense that it is portrayed in that particular medium. yes, it was the first time that I developed any figurative work and portraiture and self-portrait in painting. And if someone would go back to my art practice, especially in the beginning, they would sense that I do take kind of not only risks, but I have a high confidence with first times, you know, like first fresco, I did an 80 square meter, you know, abstraction, okay, let's do the 12 by 6 meters, just go for it. I'm not only talking about my muscles in here or my mental muscles or taking risks, but there's something very crucial about fresco and about that sense of beginning and that very empowering feeling that you cannot edit a lot, you know. So when you prepare yourself to paint in fresco medium, you maybe draft and sketch and do a lot of preparations. But when you execute it on the real body of work, whether it's wood or walls, there's a contained time, and I know this might exist in other painting mediums, but in fresco even more, it's more urgent, it's more, because it's a fast medium, because you have to work on wet, because you have to, if you need to edit, it's very rare that you can just edit it with the pigments. You might have to scratch the whole surface the next day. So when I prepare myself mentally, emotionally, when I have an idea of what I want to do, when I start, I do it fast and I do it with really super high, like emotional, not presence, but like I feel like I get prepared in a way where it's this one time. If that doesn't work, I start again, you know? So I feel like, especially those projects where I did my beginnings, when I started like large scale for the first time, portrait first time, self-portrait, they have that energy of being very contained, very powerful, because like there's a lot I want to say, but I have so much little time to do, and you cannot have a lot of errors, let's say. And if there's maybe an error, it's in a gesture, in a pigment, but if it start becoming something completely different from what you want, you have to start from scratch or just repeat it or do something else. So yeah, that sense of beginning in the theme itself is also very much, it has the energy of how frescoes are made, you know, in a way.